say this in the candidness of our group here is please, I got your message here, um, is please pray for the young Hendersons as they're doing their thing down there. And on the surface, it seems like everything's going really well, but in their latest video, she's indicated there's problems, including recently their power was being threatened to shut off. We don't know the whole story. I don't even want to bother inquiring about it because they tend to be very private with those things. But please keep them in your prayers. Um, no, their little campsite that they have going down there. I mean, he's had problems with permits and problems with just keeping the money coming in and so on. So they won't tell you these things, but if you've been through these things, you can recognize the keywords and the phrases and the stress in people's eyes that they're going through the same thing. So they become very recognizable to you. And so I'll just say, please pray for them. Power of prayer is a wonderful thing, and it can change anybody in God's will, and it could also bring God harder in their life in good ways. So there's also other things going on that you warrant prayers for them too. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I do cringe a little bit when I hear people starting a ministry because you'll find out from this message that it's not always a good thing for everybody. And some people, they do really well with it and they do the right things because they have a commitment to the truth. And then there's those who are in it for themselves and for their own reasons. And I've run into both. So yeah, this message I gave 8 years ago, and the Sabbath before I gave it, we were speeding home. It was July 23rd because my mother was in the hospital, and we got the call that she wasn't going to last very long. So we left Buffalo, came all the way down, went to the hospital, UPMC, and we just got there just before she died. And so we saw the whole thing. So we saw their last moments that Sabbath, and we didn't leave there till I think it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. And it was probably one of the biggest sobering experiences of my life. And, Scott, knowing that I was on the speaking schedule the following Sabbath, said, "You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it." And it's like, you know what? After this, I think I really need to. So he let me do it, gave me full brain to do it. We had guests that day, and it was interesting to see the reaction of people because they don't think about these things. And it was interesting that that was the subject for the day, the same week. And we had basically, she watched her die. We made all the arrangements, and by Friday she was cremated, and we were making plans of what would be probably one of the hardest 5 years of my life to follow. And so it was something I'll never forget. It left some pretty scarring mental issues. I'll be honest with you, going through what I did afterwards and having to deal with those things. But I kept thinking about this, especially in the last year, about this message. And it took me a while to find it on my computer because it's 8 years ago. And so I finally was able to find it. And the title is Signs That You're Under a Spiritual Attack. Signs That You're Under a Spiritual Attack. And when I first gave it, it was more like a Greg Laurie kind of uppity message. But as you dig deeper into the subject, it is very much something you need to be aware of and to be humble and recognize the signs of. And especially with the world that we have today, where there's so much going on that it seems it's more difficult to be a Christian in, you're going to be under attack more and more. And it's not going to be in the ways that you think it is. You can have external attacks. You can have people throwing rocks at you and protesting what you do or trying to cancel you, like it happened to me. But it'll happen in other ways because there's an adversary waiting to see where you're vulnerable, and he wants to wait for the right opportunity to strike you. And he uses that. And keep in mind, as we see in the Bible, that God allows these things. He's still under God's control. What he does to us is still in his hands. So our adversary can only go as far as God allows him to go. And you have to remember that. But he is a very cunning and prolific foe. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows how to get us. He knows all the things. Like we've seen in the Bible, he knows the right buttons to push in our lives. And he can knock us off our spiritual walk if he was allowed to do so. God tends to not do that unless he has a valid reason in his will to do that to a person. And we don't know what that is. I listened to a great message this week called Why God's Word is Unsearchable from Romans 11. And wow, is that a powerful thing. We don't know why he does things he does, but we know he does them. And he knows why he does them. And that should be good enough for us. And so he can knock us off our spiritual walk if he chooses to do so. And we've seen that with a lot of things in the past where people seem to be going full guns into the faith, and all of a sudden something happens and they're boom, way out in left field, gone completely, way out there. I was telling Mr. Manning about a video we watched yesterday. Why did Herbert Armstrong meet with 300 world leaders? And if you ever want to understand why we don't want to go back to the way things were then, watch the video and you'll see why. And that's, again, so many people were affected by that split, including the author of that video. And he talks about that in the beginning. So it's going to be hard to recognize when you're under a spiritual attack. And it could come at any time, in any circumstance, and also in varying intensities. A spiritual attack can be a well-coordinated series of events that happen to us to change the way that we feel about God and how we live a godly life. And that's the whole purpose of them, is to change the way that we feel about God. I mean, you'll see Christians out there that on the surface are like, yeah, I'm all for God. I love Jesus. I love all this stuff. And they're on a shaky foundation in some cases. So if something bad happens to them, they're gone. Whereas some people can endure and endure and endure and still be that happy is the place he's trying to get us. An interesting story is there was a bunch of people from Moldova on a ship, and Philip Yancey was with them, and they were in a storm, and they are fellow Christians. And anyone who knows who Philip Yancey is, okay, yeah. He wrote a lot of good Christian stuff, very cool stuff too about suffering and overcoming difficulties and that. And these folks from Moldova, when they hit this storm, they started to pray and rejoice and be thankful for it. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, we figured this is our time to go. God ordained it, so we're going to be joyful about it." And he's like, "How many of us think about that?" And he's just taken back by that. So, as far as going back to Satan, who is our adversary, we see his tactics as far as how he operates in the wild. If you ever watch those nature documentaries with, predator and prey, when they come up against someone who's formidable or another animal, like, lions are roughly a third the size of a wildebeest, and actually the wildebeest is actually a more powerful animal. He has to wear him down in order to kill him. And my friend Don, he used to go to Yellowstone all the time, and he was telling me one time he went there, so it was the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. Is I seen a wolf chase a bison up the side of a hill, and he chased him. And this was no little hill; this was steep. He chased him straight up there because he knew he'd wear him down, getting him to the top. And sure enough, he started to stall out climbing this hill, and the wolf just went right for him and took him out. One wolf. And that's how Satan operates in our life. He's like a predator, and he functions like a predator. And he'll treat you like your prey. And it's only by God's grace that he stays out of your life like he does. So you have to remember that. Even killer whales, they wait for the right opportunities with seals. They wait till they're most vulnerable, and then they attack. And you'll see that on nature documentaries, all that stuff. And there's several examples in the wild of how prey and how predators react. We see that in our neighborhood all the time. It's amazing to watch how some of these animals hunt. And they're very cunning at how they do it. And it's scary sometimes how efficient they are at killing their prey. And it's interesting because we had squirrels starting to cause problems again. And I was sighting into 22, and then she goes out to cut the grass, and there's a dead squirrel laying out there. And she's like, "Is this yours?" And he goes, "I have no idea. I mean, maybe he was scared by all the gunfire. I don't know." But there's this dead squirrel laying there, and I figure either one of the eagles got him or what. Because it's funny because out there, I'll go for a walk, and some of the birds of prey will follow me from a distance to see what I'll scare up. And sure enough, sometimes I do scare up stuff for them. And it's kind of interesting to see how it works. But keep in mind, that's how Satan operates. The desire for Satan, and we discussed this in our teen and young adult study, is to take away the reward that God has for us in the end, because the more he can knock us off that, the more he can do to us in that, the more chance we're going to say we had enough and we're going to give up. God knows how much we can take. He never gives us more than we can handle. But there's times it'll feel like he's given us more than we can handle. And it could cause us to lose commitment to him in many ways. We can still be his. We can still be part of his grace. We can still be under his grace. But what it does is it creates a situation where we're going to have to answer for what we have done. And I don't know about you, but I think about judgment so often. And I think about what it's like to stand in front of him in Christ and answer for the things that I've done. And it's not a very comfortable feeling for me. I know I've been forgiven of a lot, but I wonder what I haven't been forgiven of and what he can still point to. It's great to know that Christ is our advocate and he'll stand there and defend us. And that's a wonderful thing. But to be brought down to your knees like that and to think about those things is something that should be of our everyday life. What are the things lacking in our lives? And that's honestly what spiritual attacks are supposed to bring out. The things that we're lacking in our lives. Now, a few people in my life, including both my parents, have had heart attacks. They had what are long-term heart attacks. They didn't know that they had heart attacks. There's a lady that used to cut my hair. She was a young lady in her 40s, and she was telling me one time, it goes, "Yeah, my husband was just diagnosed with a heart attack, but we didn't find out until 6 months afterwards because hormones start to go into the body, and they start to they do what they do to indicate that something was wrong." And for both my parents, they had long-term heart attacks where the results weren't immediately known until later on. And so what happens is that, and the same with a heart attack, the spiritual attack will work the same way. It could come really hard and fast, or it can happen to you and you didn't even know it happened, but the signs were there. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. He tried to call me. But anyway, two people in my life, my parents ended up with heart attacks, and they didn't know for quite a while. So, hold on a second. Hopefully, he rejoins us. So, how many people are familiar with what happens in a heart attack? It's part of it, yeah. Yeah. And that's what happens is it happens in different ways. Most of the time, a heart attack is caused when there's a blood clot or when there's a ceasing of the heart altogether. I mean, that's why some people will be scared to the point of, or traumatized to the point where their heart stops. There's no clot there, but the trauma is so deep that it causes their heart to cease function. And it'll stop your heart. That's a heart attack. And a spiritual attack kind of works the same way, but in the spiritual sense, is a part where your faith is going along, going along, going along, and then certain sins, certain aspects of your traits, certain carnal activities start to restrict what you do. And then all of a sudden it stops. And it does for some stop permanently. When a heart attack happens, one of the problems with human bodies is that when blood flow stops, the tissue starts to die. And when a heart attack is caught early, you prevent a lot of things from happening, but not everything. And so you carry around the damage of what it's already done. Well, even within a minute, damage sets in. When it goes over 30 minutes, the damage is permanent and often fatal. And with a spiritual attack done the right way, you can have similar results to your faith if you allow these things to happen, if you let these things go unchecked, if you don't catch yourself and say, hey, something isn't right here. What is he trying to show me? What is going wrong with this, and why is it happening? You know, one of the things I hated about years ago was they used to tell us, never ask why God does something. That's not what's in the Bible. He's always telling us to ask why, because that's how we learn what's going on with ourselves and our relationship with Him. If your wife takes off with the car and you don't see her for a month, you want to know why, right? You want to know what's going on. If your house falls into a hole into the ground, you want to know why it's in the ground. You're not just, oh, just accept that it's there. He wants you to communicate with Him. He wants you to find out why these things are. So keep in mind that that's what a spiritual attack will do. It'll cause you to start a spiritual death spiral. And if it's effective enough, it could possibly remove you from the faith that you have. It's not what God wants. If you're His, you're His. But there's certain things that you have to be aware that it does. So there's 7 common symptoms of a spiritual attack, and there is ways that you can use to overcome them. The first sign that you're under a spiritual attack is a loss of spiritual desire. A loss of spiritual desire. Now, this could come in a lot of different ways. I mean, you can be just tired of the church scene. You can be tired of hearing people like me. You can be tired of just learning about the Bible. Something will take your focus away from these things. You know, some other passion, some other focus comes into your life. I mean, sometimes, you know, it could be a person. It could be anything, you know. And what it does is it turns you away from the things that God wants you to be in your life. This is one of the first warning signs of a spiritual attack. And it could be external problems. It could be internal, mental, physical. It could be any one of these things. It could be a distraction. You know, one of the things that comes out a lot is that, you know, God wants you to be passionate about Him and His way of life. But this world is full of things that you can be passionate about. There's you know, you can be passionate about hobbies. You can be passionate about causes and different things that are out there that seem very legitimate, very powerful, but they're distractions for where you should be. You know, and the world can be full of those. You know, you have the Earth movement, this movement, and Save the Whales, and all these things. They can be very powerful distractions. Yeah.
So, loss of spiritual desire is caused by idolatry
Yeah, more or less.
because you would think something
Or you become lazy because you just don't want to work at it.
right.
I mean, you know, the biggest problem that we have because we believe in a Sabbath rest is you'll have multiple interpretations of what a Sabbath rest is. And the essence of what it is a separation one day from the world to be in God's presence. That's what it is. You're supposed to separate yourself from the world to be in His presence. So there's some work involved. To be together takes work. To be loving takes work. We're not naturally loving creatures. We have to work at that too. But when you have that loss of desire, you're preparing yourself for a spiritual attack because you're becoming vulnerable. We don't live on feelings alone, but you know, we need to not do things out of obligation. Rather, we should do them because we delight in doing them. That's where having that spiritual desire lives, is in the delight to be here, to be with God, to do what He wants us to do. And when you delight in those things, it's harder to attack a person. When you start to not delight in those things, and you do it because, well, we're supposed to keep the Sabbath, we're supposed to do the holy days, then you're starting to lose that desire. You're only merely functional at that point. You're not doing it for the right reasons. I mean, in all honesty, even as a little group, we could say, yeah, we'll just move everything to Sunday and be like everybody else, right? I mean, we had that power to do those things. But we love what God has given us in the Sabbath, right? We love the holy days and what they symbolize. And honestly, they become more meaningful since we started this, especially Pentecost. I mean, there's so much I learned about it just being out of the old atmosphere and into the new, and seeing it through new eyes and saying, wow, that really is cool, and that really makes sense. All that stuff, it really does make sense, and it's really exciting. That's an increase of spiritual desire. When you're setting yourself up for an attack, you lose that kind of desire. Our former pastor was saying when they had the worldwide split, they didn't know where to go. They were without a church. They didn't want to go back, and their church had switched to Sundays where they were. And so they would hang out at the family's lakeside estate that they had, I think it was on Lake Ontario. And they just keep the Sabbath themselves. And it was him, his wife, and his son. And then they're like, there's a boat out there. Maybe we should get some hot dogs put on the grill. Maybe we should take the boat out. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should go do that. And what they found is over time, it started to become another day to them. And then at some point, he caught himself and said, this wasn't what this day was meant for. And so one day he shows up in a very small United church that we were part of. And he said, I had to do something. I had to do something. Because it was becoming another day to me. Yeah.
Just wanted to add something that came to my mind, the group should know. This group was used as an example recently for another benefit, another Sabbath keeper in another congregation part of the country, because that Sabbath keeper had a problem wanting to worship in a building like this with part of the Sunday group. That person had problems with it, and yeah, they were given this group as an example of how that's okay, and that really helped that person.
I like this church.
Yeah. Rethink the way that person has to rethink the way that they think, because they thought, oh, just being in the building itself is wrong, not necessarily, right? And I think it's a pretty powerful testament to the fact that as such a small group and only being, as a group for a short period of time, there's already like this impact starting to be out there. So
It's good to note that. It really is. Yeah, it's really good to note that. Yeah, and I know even with CFN, they're surprised at how far we've gotten. And that's because we have a spiritual desire to be together, right? As much as I'm not a great person, you still come, so I'm. A large majority of them do, but there's also a good number who succeed because they have spiritual desire. They have a desire to be together. One of the things I did not want to turn into when I left Cagua was I did not want to become a living room church. And I say, in all costs, no matter what it took, I didn't want to become that, because Scott's example of what happened to him at the lake, it rings in my ears to this day. That it all of a sudden became another day to them. And the alarm bell started to go off in his head. And I remember that to this day because he told me this back in '96. And saying, that's what I want to avoid. And so that spiritual desire is a key. And when you start to lose it, that's a huge warning sign. It's a very huge warning sign. And that's why you need to stay close to the trunk of the tree. No matter what, you need to stay close. In Galatians 6, verse 9, if you'd like to turn there, this is also in line with the Sabbath note, another one that I could have put in there and didn't, but he starts off with a thought in verse 8. And this is the thing, when Paul's telling a church this, you can see that he's addressing a problem. So he's not just blurting this stuff out and hoping that, it addresses some problem. He's addressing a specific problem. I got to see if Ken's there. Is he there? Oh, okay, cool. He's there.
I'm here.
Okay. I'm going to be calling on you later on, just so you know. So Galatians 6, starting in verse 8, goes, whoever sows to please the flesh, from the flesh it will reap destruction. Back to the Sabbath note again. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for all in proper time will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Are you going to get tired of doing good? Sure you are. Everybody does. But he's employing us, he's telling us, don't give up. Don't stop doing these things. And apparently the Galatian church, they were having some problems, and he was addressing it. Don't give up. You're going to reap the reward of doing these things in the end. And that's one thing about a spiritual church, one that's in line with the Holy Spirit and nurtures the Holy Spirit, is that you're going to let people use their spiritual gifts to the fullest example. That's what this is all about, folks. This is why I don't restrict people from doing the things that come through the Spirit, because we need to see what God is doing with you to benefit each other. And that's why I don't restrict those things. I want to see it in its fullest. I want to see everything it can give us. And whatever it takes, we'll do that. So keep in mind that loss of spiritual desire will open you up to a spiritual attack. Another one is, believe it or not, physical fatigue. Physical fatigue. And it's not something that you experience every day. My thyroid quit on me back in '98. And so most of my days are spent in basically a permanent tired state. And when I first was diagnosed, I spent most of that summer just starting to regain what little I had left and build on that. And so I spent most of that summer sleeping and freezing, even in 80-degree weather, because I was 2 weeks away from basically dying, and everything was shutting down. And so I felt the fullness of physical fatigue for a good 6 months until things started to really improve. So we have to understand that we're made of flesh. We're not spiritual beings yet. And if our body is weak, it allows things to get into our mind. It allows us not to resist certain things. And that can negatively affect the human spirit and also a relationship with the Holy Spirit if we let things get in. And that can include fear, distrust, and anxiety. One thing you have to understand about the world's news is it's all designed to make you afraid. It's all designed to make you cling to them to get the latest, so you can continue to be afraid, like an addiction. You come back because you want to know more. You want to know more. You want to see what's going on. You want to learn what's going on here. Why is this city falling apart? Why are these crazy people doing these things? You need to know. You need to know. Are they going to come to your house? Are they going to knock on your door? Are they going to be sleeping in your kitchen? Whatever. You start wondering about these things, and all of a sudden you're building up this, and it wears you down. This constant worrying, this constant focus, this constant thing taking away from you. If you go back to a few weeks, we talked about something that appears in the Bible 365 times. Unfortunately for Dave, it doesn't appear for him because he's 366. But what was that? Yep. No. Yeah. So you're born on 366 day, so you don't get one. Why do you think he told you 365 times to fear not? Yeah, because we fear everything if we didn't have him. Imagine not having him. Every one of us can lay claim to the fact that we know God in some way. So we have that. We go through life. We know God. We know him at least in the small ways that the smallest person here knows him. Imagine not having any of that. And you go through life afraid of everything. So as we get older, we tend to slow down. Things get harder to do. Even coming to church can be hard to do. I mean, there's some people that it's really hard for them to get there. And what happens, when we start to wear down physically or we're too tired. I mean, actually, you work 12-hour days and then have to go to church. Luckily, church was only on the other side of town, and it's 20 minutes away. But you're tired after 12-hour days. And I used to have to work a swing shift on Thursday nights to Fridays, where I work second shift and then be back at leave there at midnight and then have to come back at 7 o'clock in the morning, finish the next day. And I was tired. But the thing is, I admit I look forward to seeing my friends there. I look forward to being away from that atmosphere, because anyone who's worked in a factory knows how fun those atmospheres are, and how much you look forward to getting away from. So that was my incentive to do that. So we have to actively, and like I said, it's a different kind of rest. It's a rest from the world that we get away from these things. one thing we have to understand is we face our greatest attacks, during these times when we're worn down and we're tired, and you know, we feel it. Who did that in the Bible? Does anyone remember? Who? Yeah, see, you're on the ball. You know exactly that. How many know? How many here know the story of Elijah? Yeah, that you can be worn down over time, even at, and you can be worn down after experiencing something wonderful. I mean, you know, we had our anniversary this week, and it was wonderful, and I actually felt a little let down after it was over. It always goes by too quick. But Elijah is a great example of that, because in 1 Kings 18, I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll also give you a synopsis of it. He took on the prophets of Baal, and he had this great display of how their God doesn't work and how the true God does. And he put all this water on this pile of wood. He summoned God, or said, God, bring fire. Boom! Here's a fire, and lit this whole thing on fire with all the thing. And then after that, he went out and had them destroy all the prophets of Baal. And you think that'd be a real high point, because basically he eliminated all the competition in his life, right? And he's putting God on the throne he deserves. But all of a sudden, here comes this woman, Jezebel, and she's like, yeah, we're going to kill you. Just what you did to the prophets of Baal, we're going to do it to you. What was his reaction? He went and hid. I mean, she must have been a ferocious woman. I don't know. I mean, I couldn't imagine that. But, it's just like, I mean, how ferocious was this woman? I mean, how crazy was she? Maybe she was really crazy. You see a lot of that in movies now with the strong female villains now. Maybe she was like one of them. I don't know. But anyway, you see that he runs and hides, and he felt like a house. He felt like a house of cards. But God didn't say, "Okay, you're done. I don't need you no more." Well, what did he do? Elijah was out in the desert, and he was sleeping. The angel woke him up, fed him, and then they go, "I got some more stuff for you to do." And by the way, there's 7,000 that didn't bow a knee to Baal, so you're not alone. Just so you know, there's 7,000 more of you, just similar to you out there. And so he wanted to die, he wanted all that, so he said, "No, I'm not done with you." So he went and he performed different tasks, including anointing. And he put Elisha in his place by giving him his mantle. But you see, it even didn't stop there. Eventually, as the Bible says, he was taken to heaven. And then we see even way down the line with Jesus Christ, he appears in the transfiguration. So what you see here is he cemented his place where he was supposed to be. Even in his doubts, even in his wearing down, even in his most vulnerable state, it didn't matter. God's like, I still have stuff for you to do. Let's do it. And he still had that place through it all. God wasn't through with him. So that serves as a powerful example that, yes, he was spiritually attacked. Something went wrong where he was just totally done, and he was completely done. And he went to God, and I want to die. I don't know why, if he really wanted to die, why didn't he just go say, "Hey, Jezebel, I'm right here. Do what you want." No, he didn't really want to die, but he felt like he wanted to die. So that's a good example of that. Though he still had to do his thing, and so it worked out for him in the end. And keep in mind that when you're going through an attack, and an attack, especially when you're vulnerable, it could be an indication that things are going to turn around for you in a good way, and God's preparing you for it. And there is always that possibility. And I've seen that where people were brought very low and smashed down really hard in their lives in order to bring something good out of them. And you see that for a lot of people in the Christian world, they had to be brought to a state of nothing to become something. And it's a very powerful example throughout that. George Mueller was one of them. James Hudson Taylor. I like him because he had the ministry of acceptance. He resisted the calling for so long in his life. I don't want anything to do with Jesus Christ. Nothing. And his sisters did a whammy on him. They prayed every day, 3 times a day, that he would be in the faith. Finally, he gets to say, "Okay, I accept this. I am starting, something's clicking with this." And then he spent 5 years from being certified as a minister to actually becoming a minister, where there's absolutely nothing going on in his life. And it's called the ministry of acceptance, where for 5 years he was nothing. He'd wandered the streets of East End London wondering, what does God have in store for me? And something clicked in him and said, You know what? They ought to take a trip to China, and the rest was history. Because of him, the gospel was spread through all of China, and he's actually one of the highest revered Christians in that country. Because once he got there, there was nothing slowing this guy down, and he was just going and going and going. So we never know how those things are going to work, but that wearing down brings us to a state of humility. And so it does something in the end. Everything is in God's control. You have to understand that. Yeah, James Hudson Taylor. Yeah. Now, the third one is the lack attack. Lack attack. The third sign that you may be under attack is a lack attack. And there's times that it seems that all your resources have dried up at the same time. Now I can say safely, I've been there at least 3 times in my life. And I probably will probably be a fourth, a fifth, maybe, who knows. I've been there where I've basically run out of everything and didn't know where I was going. And we see this in the Bible where?
Job.
Yep, there we go. We got it. Yep, Job. Yep. Yep. Take everything away. Job was the classic example because you see that Satan and God had a conversation about it. Have you ever considered my servant Job over here? And he goes, well, you put a hedge around him. He goes, well, okay, you can. I'll take it away because he knew what the substance that Job had. He knew what it was supposed to bring out, and so the whole thing was stripping him of everything just to bring out the last problem that remained in him. And in doing so, he exposed the true Job. Now, it wasn't what Satan said. It wasn't what his. Because when we did the study in the Teen and Young Adult study, one of the things that was revealed was that Satan's accusations about Job to God were actually voiced by the 3 friends he had. Because you can see it in their reaction to him, that they were the ones who said it first. And Satan would just took that right to God and said, this is what they say about him, and I'm saying it too. That you take all this stuff away from him, he's going to curse you to your face. His wife wanted to do it. Just curse him and die. Just be done with it. And he wouldn't do it. So when the lack attack happens, it's the intent by Satan is to take your eyes off of God. That's what he wanted to see with Job, not knowing fully the character that Job had. And it makes you put your eyes on the things that you have, money, your status, your family. In his case, all that was ripped from him. All of it was ripped from him. And if he can get you to worry instead of worshiping, then you'll start to make decisions on opportunity rather than faith. Keep that in mind. You'll start making decisions on opportunities rather than faith. Why do people steal so much? It's an opportunity thing. Look what's going on in New York City. The crime rate's soaring through the roof. Because you steal anything under $1,000, it's not even considered a crime anymore. The crime rate's just skyrocketing to astronomical proportions. You give people a berth to steal, they steal. It's an opportunity to steal. Just this week they had an off-duty police officer get carjacked by 2 Venezuelans, illegal immigrants. Given an opportunity, they'll take it. You're not making decisions on faith. When you can resist those things and do things in faith and not cave to that, it shows that you have a strong faith in those things. There's 2 parts of your life, 2 places in your life you're going to be especially vulnerable to temptation. It's when you have nothing and when you have everything. Those are the 2 most vulnerable states you'll ever live in.
I've also heard that those are the times that define you too.
Yep.
Define you.
Your relationship should never change in either one of those cases. And there's some people that seemingly do have everything and still remain close to God. And Job lost everything, but exposed something very significant about him that still separated him from God. And that was his own self-righteousness. And that's something that we have to be concerned of too, because a lot of times we can fall into that self-righteous thing. Well, why did you do this, God? I don't deserve this, God. Why did you take all these things away from him. And then eventually God put him in his place, and he said, where were you when I created the foundations of the world? Where were you when I did all these wonderful things? You weren't even around then, and you're trying to say that you deserve something, And he finally smashed him into the place he belonged. And what did he do afterwards? Gave him several times the blessings he had before that, because he finally put him in a place where he belonged to be. He didn't really write anything. He didn't do this wonderful work. He just loved God and submitted to him in every possible way of his life. That's where God wanted him. That's why he orchestrated that whole thing, to finally get that one last stumbling block out of his life, to make him as pure as he could in the sense that he was. We covered that. Maybe we'll have to bring that back someday as a study on Job. But it actually took us a whole year to get through it. I mean, that's how detailed it was.
Talking about, right? These things like make us trip, take our eyes off God, right?
Yep.
We're looking somewhere else, not on God.
Yeah, because that's it. If you're rich, you're going to look at your money, your status, your wealth, and all these things. I mean, that's the one thing I like about the disciples. And eventually they became apostles. But it goes. Eden Tozer pointed out, goes, they had the best Bible schooling of anyone on this planet because they spent 3.5 years with Jesus Christ. You can't get any better than that. And yet they had no diplomas. They had no little plaque to hang on their wall saying who they were. But yet they had the best Bible instruction anyone can have.
They couldn't even record everything they learned that he taught them. There was the scripture that just came up this week, that there was not enough something.
Yeah, all the things that Christ did, there's no books to contain it all.
Yes.
Yeah, very, very, that's a wonderful thing. And they got to see all that stuff. And in fact, it became routine to them to the point where they're starting to get a little weak in areas in their life. So number 4 is another aspect that you could be setting yourself up for a spiritual attack is weak prayer life. Weak prayer life. And, if you have a weak prayer life, if you're not praying often, and you need to pray often, or if you don't pray at all, which I've encountered too, you're setting yourself up for a spiritual attack. Because again, your eyes is on something else. It's not the relationship you should have with God. Now we see this because Christ had to address this at a very key time. And this is Matthew 26 in verses 40 through 41. It's interesting because, like I said, the disciples, they saw him every day. They were with him every day. They saw all the things that he did to the point where it started to become complacent to him. And you see this in this passage of the Bible. They started to become oh-hum and started to think about themselves. And they were like, we're going to be like the greatest in the kingdom. Oh, I'm going to be greater than you because I've done this, and I'm going to be greater than you. But at this point in time, Christ was in agony because he's about to be crucified. He's about to do the very thing he was sent to do. And they're just sitting around talking about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. And he gets angry. And you can see there's an anger in him. And he says this thing in Matthew 26 in verse 40 and through 41. He says, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Jesus asked his disciples. Then he told them, watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. So you can talk the game. You can say that you're all these things, and that's what they're doing. But they are leaving themselves open because they have the living God right there about to do what he was sent to do for all of humanity. And they're worried about themselves and their status and all these things. The world likes to portray God in a very negative light, especially nowadays. They make him look barbaric and uncaring. And as it takes a real separation from even things we've been taught in the past, from the things that are physical, to look at God and look at him the way we're supposed to look at him. And he's a very caring and loving creator. And he wants to hear from us. And don't let anyone ever say it different. He wants to hear from you. He wants you to talk to him. He loves it when we take this tool of prayer and use it every day of our lives. He gave it to us so we could. It's like having a phone in your house or on your person or in your pocket. You could just take and say, anytime, any place, say, hey, God, I got this thing going on in my life. And, and another tragic sermon from years ago was someone said, he doesn't want to hear about all the minutia of your life. That's garbage. pure garbage. He wants to hear about every aspect of your every little detail. You ever have, most of us who have been parents love it when our kids come and they like to talk about all the things they did. And even when they're adults, we like to hear about that stuff too. Because it's connection, it's love, it's like they care enough to come to you. That's how he is. That's how he is. He loves that stuff. He loves to hear all about your life because he says, okay, well, this is how it worked for them, and this is how they're responding to it, and they're coming to me a little bit. You're not going to your neighbor. You're not going to your dog or whatever. You're not doing any of that stuff. You're going to him. He loves that stuff. And you have to remember it. He loves that stuff. There's never a time he'll refuse your prayer unless it involves sin. Unless you're saying, yeah, God, help me rob this bank over here and just be with me the whole time I do. He ain't going to listen to that one, I don't think, So, and you can't be confused with ritual prayer. You can't be, someone complained one time I gave a closing prayer and they said I mentioned God too much in it. Okay, so that, and then he gets up there and he's a pastor. He gets up and goes, when you give a prayer, you should never mention God too much in a prayer. Okay. Where's that in the Bible? Okay, and sorry, but it's just not there. And and one of the best examples of a prayer is there's the simplest one you could ever give. If you're really struggling, it's just simply, God help me. He fills in all the blanks before and after. He knows exactly what you need before you even ask it. There's even a scripture that says that, right? So he knows it all. It's like what Adrian Rogers, we listened to that message a while back, and he's saying it's like we're flying and he's the pilot and you're just in the seat next to him, and then he lets you fly the plane for a while. That's what prayer does. It's like, yeah, okay, you can take the controls for a while, but I'm still in charge. And I thought it was a great example of that and how that works. But you need to have a strong prayer life. We had a pastor admit to us a while back. He's like, yeah, and you could see it weeks and weeks before that. He says, my prayer life, and he confessed to the whole congregation, my prayer life has been very bad lately. And you can notice the changes before that because he wasn't as committed. He wasn't as powerful as he was. And he admitted that my prayer life's been suffering. Part of that is because the church put too much on him at that point. He's struggling to meet it all. And so something had to give. And unfortunately, the most powerful thing he had gave. And that's what happened to him. So open that door, walk into it any time. And even if you think it's strong enough, reevaluate it. See where you can improve on it. See what you can do differently to make it better. See how you can learn to be more trusting of him in those things. And remember that he wants to hear from you all the time. So number 5 is feelings of being overwhelmed and helpless. How many of us have ever felt that way? Feelings of being overwhelmed and helpless. So you ever feel overwhelmed by your circumstances? Yeah, we saw in Elijah's case that he did too. It could be a sign that you're about to undergo a spiritual attack. Now understand that circumstance in itself comes from 2 words. Circum means around, and stance means stand. In other words, you're standing surrounded by what's going on in your life. And it doesn't take long to feel overwhelmed and helpless. When my mom died, that began 5 years of probably the deepest struggle of my life because we went to the trailer where they were living and I was ready to just burn the thing to the ground because it was neglected, full of stuff. The work was grossly, to get it to where it needed to be sold, was grossly underestimated. I mean, torching it would have been a dream, but it's just, we had to see it through. And it took 5 years to see it through. And when my dad moved to another residence afterwards, the same thing happened. I don't know how throwing out so many things that we did, moving into another house, it looked like just as much stuff was there. And we had to do the same thing for a number of years after that. I felt very overwhelmed by that stuff. And we had to take it a piece at a time and a piece at a time and a piece at a time. And it's just, to this day, I don't, I can't physically tell you how we got through. Spiritually, I can tell you how I got through it. Physically, I don't know how I got through all that because it's just, we couldn't invite people to help us because it's like every box had things in there that could potentially hurt a person. I got stabbed at least a half a dozen times by needles. And, it's just, it's just the things you saw and experienced through that is just, one, you can't believe it's your parents, and then two, you can't believe people will live like this, and three, you're just like, what is this going to do to me in the end? So you have to understand that things can easily overwhelm you, and sometimes you'll run into those things in life. Well, things will overwhelm you. It could be grief, could be a loss of someone close to you, and those things can the situations involved with those can surround you. I remember when her brother died, and John, their family hadn't really experienced death at that level. We've gone through it in our family. We lost a good number of people in the 80s. It seems like we were losing 3 people a year, and it didn't matter how old or young they were. It just almost became routine. When her brother died, it was very devastating to the family. They had to work through things they never had to work through. And I was there through most of it. And it was very hard to watch them go through these things. And it's very hard to see the just outpouring of grief. One thing they didn't do is they didn't turn away from God during that time. And that was probably the most inspirational thing of it all. So Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes a heart sick. Have you ever had your dreams crushed? Have you ever had, your expectations slammed in the ground? It'll make you sick, right? And one of the words of advice given out there recently was don't set your expectations too high. And that's a good for anything, including relationships or your expectations out of life. You can't set your goals too high. You can't set your dreams too high in the sense that they're unattainable. You have to be realistic with them. One hallmark of a Christian is they're supposed to be realists. They're supposed to see things for what they are. So it makes a heart sick. Yes. Yep. Yep.
Deferred means that you're waiting, like it's been promised to you, and you're waiting, and you're waiting too long.
Yep. Well, it's that. And then you turn to yourself and to your efforts. Rather, it's like James Hudson Taylor, 5 years, nothing, absolutely no indication of what he was supposed to do in life, nothing. And he wandered the streets of East End, just wondering, what am I going to do? You know. Yeah.
You work, you're hoping for pay at the end. If you keep holding your pay, you're gonna worry, where's my pay, right?
Yep.
So,
So that makes you sick. It makes you worried. It makes you distrust God. And sometimes we do. Sometimes we're like, oh, I know better than he does because I see it better. He sees it far better than you. He's controlling things at all ends. He just wants to see what you're going to do a lot of times. And if you go to the opposite end of the spectrum, you got Hebrews 1:11 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. So you're putting your faith, you're putting your hopes and your trust in God. And that's what the faith chapter is all about, is all those who came before that look at how they trusted God. Look at how it worked out for them. Look at how they've, even Abraham trusted afar off but never got to see the promise that he was given. But yet, he was the most revered person, even in Muslim communities that go back to Abraham. I mean, he had such a profound influence of all of society that he didn't see it himself that he would have that influence on them. It was interesting because recently I came across a thing on the internet just by chance. I was looking up some locomotive specs, and I came across a thing where a guy did a travel blog through our area, and he stopped at the one museum where the 2 engines I used to own are there, and he wrote up a description on each one. And when it came to the Plymouth, which is the one I kept, he had the entire story there is how they ended up there, including my name, what I've done, all those things. Like, I never met this guy. How did he know this? How did he even know this story? I mean, there's not many people knew this. Somehow the story got to him somehow, and he put it out there for everybody to see. And so you don't know how you're going to influence people that way. So understand the enemy can get you to lose hope and he can get you to stop living by faith. Again, you go back to opportunities. You go back to, to the things that you see and the reactions that you have to them. Galatians 5:7 says that we are to live by faith and not by sight. That's another special music song out there. And we tend to see what's happening around us. We tend to lose our faith. That's what the news is supposed to do to us. That's by design, to get us to lose the confidence we have in the unseen and the things that we understand from God, and put it on mankind that somehow they're going to fix these problems. They're not going to fix these problems. Do you think Trump's going to fix these problems? He's not going to fix these problems. He's going to be part of these problems in a different way, because the floodgate has been thrown open so wide now that it takes God to fix these problems. And it always takes God to fix these problems. If you want to have a fun time doing research in history, go back to the mid-1800s. Look at what England was going through in the mid-1800s. It sounds a lot like the world today. A lot like it. You didn't have the rainbow LGBT stuff. It was present, believe me, it was there. But you had a complete loss of respect for the human person in all of society. Children living on the streets, prostitution, murder, all that stuff, and the highest levels they've ever seen. What happened around that time? Great revivals. Yeah. The Reformation was the 1500s. Yeah, revival. You had G.K. Chesterton come on the scene. You had John Wesley come on the scene. You had all these great people who really loved God come out and say, this is what it is really like. This is the God you are supposed to know. And that changed countless lives. D.L. Moody, he's an interesting guy, by the way. He's got a really interesting story behind him. And he was the American counterpart at that time, because the same type of thing, in a lesser degree, was happening from the Civil War on, because it was such a defeating thing in the United States that both sides paid for it emotionally and physically for many years to come afterwards. And it was very damaging to the entire country for a long time. And then you had people like D.L. Moody come onto the scene, and it started to really bring the traction back to God, and bring the place back. So one thing you have to understand is God usually works that way. When society takes a dump, it usually brings up and causes revivals to bring them back to Him. One of the things that I like Lifeway Research, because it gives you hard facts about the Christian world, and they're noticing a decline. It's a slight decline in ministers that accept gay marriage. You notice it hit a peak and it's starting to drop within the last year. So this is constant surveying that's pointing us out that they're not as accepting as they were of these things. So yeah. Oh, 5:7. Yeah. Yeah, live by faith, not by sight. I messed that one up. I know it's kind of a lead into what was before that I talked about. Anyway, I had to live by faith, not by sight in there. That's the most important thing. And then again, Matthew 6 and verse 33, he was telling them not to worry about stuff. And he says, seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added to you. So you're not supposed to worry about your life. You're not supposed to worry about the things in your life. He wants you to seek the kingdom first. And he also added that when he was being arrested, that if the kingdom was of this world, they would fight for me, but it's not of this world. I represent a different world, and that's the one we're supposed to be looking at. It's one of the things that was a common issue with lukewarm Christianity is people tend to look forward to the millennium. That's not what we're supposed to look forward to. We're supposed to look forward to the return of Christ. All that comes afterwards. It's all part of that. That's what we're supposed to look forward to, is His return. The Savior's return, the King that we're supposed to worship. That's what we're supposed to look forward to. So number 6 is old habits, old lifestyles, old sins resurface. You see this a lot with people who are struggling in the faith, that when the spiritual attack is happening or about to happen, is that old iniquities, old problems resurface into your life. And it's a very powerful thing, because Sometimes they do because you're not controlling the floodgate the way you're supposed to. You're not preventing these things from coming. It goes back to that discernment where if you watch things, you need to recognize that there's certain things that you should not watch. There's certain things, like for me, there's certain places, certain things I will not watch, certain things that I will not partake in because I know what they can do to me, and I know the influence that they have on me, and I recognize that in time that I should really stay away from this stuff. And that's a discernment that you build up in those things, in those sorts of circumstances. So what's the definition of iniquity? It's immoral, grossly unfair behavior. Immoral, grossly unfair behavior. I mean, it seems like, I mentioned this, that in the past year, I found many people struggling with pornography in places and people I never thought I'd hear that from. And, there's even been pastors I've known that struggle with those things. Is that you're not controlling the floodgate. You're not saying don't go there. You're not saying don't do these things. That's what happens. You open the door to being attacked through those things. And the same parts of the brain it occupies, the same parts that are stimulated by it, are the same ones that heroin stimulates it. Everyone here know a heroin addict? Anyone who's been on it? From the first high, you never stop. It never stops because the first high makes you addicted. That's how it functions. That's how porn functions. The first high keeps you coming back, and you have to resist it. You have to fight it. You have to say, I'm not going there. I'm not looking at these things. I'm not doing these things. And as I said, sin feels good for a little while, but it leaves incredible damage to your life. So even things you wouldn't think, oh, I just did this little thing for a while. It's like we were talking about earlier. You open your door up to something. I mean, you could have a white lie, whatever, and all of a sudden becomes a part of your trait. All of a sudden it becomes easier and easier and easier to do that. So, and you got people, it's funny because one of the little known creeds I think your brother's was a police officer. One of the little known creeds about police officers is that if someone's telling you the truth, there's something wrong with them. I've heard that one out of so many police officers over the years that I said it's got to be a hidden creed because they all say the same thing. And so when you start telling them the truth, they're not going to believe you because they're so used to people lying to them. But that's how it goes. You become something else through those things. We fall back on these things because things aren't going our way. We indulge back in the flesh. We're not looking to God. We're looking again to ourselves. We're looking again to opportunities. We're looking to just live our life the way we're supposed to. Someone we know recently posted on Facebook, a justification for themselves being themselves and, that I'm in control of myself. And you look at the post, it was taken directly out of a Satan worshiping thing, directly out, including a picture of the depiction of Baal behind it. And it's like, what a horrible thing to do. I don't belong, and it's like the gist of it, I don't belong to any God, I don't belong to any religion, I belong to myself, and that's all I belong to. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. You say, I belong to me. What is the thing with the abortion movement? My body, my choice. It was never your choice. Your choice was to refrain from doing what you did to get to that point. That was your choice. You blew it. And that's a honest truth. See it through. If you get to that point, see it through. I mean, I had a friend that he's struggling with that because one of the key destructive issues in his marriage is the fact that him and his wife did have an abortion. And that feeling afterwards has never left them. It never did. They sought a quick solution to that problem, and the guilt never left them. Even though he knows they've been forgiven of it, she knows that they've been forgiven of it. That guilt has never left them. So, best way to avoid that, don't do it. Simple as that. So, we have to know that there are warning signs there. And a lot of times the Holy Spirit working in us will voice warning signs. You ever have that where you have to say, something's telling me not to do this. Something's telling me to avoid this. Something's telling me I shouldn't go there. I mean, I had some really powerful examples of that in my life. I mean, one time me and her, I used to work at a train station up in Buffalo, and it was just me and her in this entirely huge building. And we're up there at the top on the 16th floor, and all of a sudden we both got the same feeling. We need to get out of here, and we need to go. There was no indication of anything wrong, nothing. We were the only ones there. The building was locked, and we're just looking at it, and we both agree we have this feeling, and it came on all of a sudden. So we worked our way down, got in the car, took off. Sometime in that time frame, someone had broken in there, and it looked like multiple people. In the place where we were, they just trashed it. It looked like at least 5 or 6 people were involved, and they just totally destroyed it. So someone was telling us to get out of there, and that's why I credit the Holy Spirit. I really do, because yeah, I don't believe in intuition. I believe in the Spirit. I believe it works in us that way. We have to understand that old habits die hard. Old things in our life are hard to resist, and sometimes you can think that you have resisted them and they're gone, but something bad happens in your life or you're knocked off your feet. I mean, smoking is one of them. I mean, I don't want to demonize it because people do struggle with that. But a lot of times people are like, like the old airplane movie. I picked a really bad day to quit smoking when all things are going wrong in the movie. I really picked a bad day to stop drinking. I just that's what it's talking. That's what it's about. The old habits die hard. When you're under stress, you think about those things. Well, I could really use a good belt of something right now. I mean, that's kind of how it works. Romans 8 verse 7. Romans 8 and verse 7. This is why it's important to remember these things, because you think you're fine, you think you're all good on your own, but you're really not. You have to really be with God all the time. You have to really think about Him and pray to Him and be connected with Him all the time. And the last place you ever want to be in life is alone with your own thoughts. And I'm going to tell you that from experience. Don't be alone with your own thoughts. Romans 8:7 says, "The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not to submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God." Again, back to the Sabbath note again. You're serving either God or you're serving sin. There's no two ways about it. There's no third way about it. There's no fourth way about it. There's only two ways to serve, and that's the other one you're serving. The flesh cannot please God. Number 7 is a very important one. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yep, that's a good one. Yep. Now, this one may strike a little hard for some people, and it's in the way it's meant to do so. The seventh sign that you're setting yourself up for a spiritual attack is that you pull away from godly relationships. You pull away from godly relationships. When old iniquities start tempting you, the next sign of a spiritual attack is sure to follow this way. Pulling away from godly relationships. Now, think back to those who've been in larger churches. When you have a problem, a sin, something, what is usually the reaction to it by other people? They tend to pull away from you, right? And you tend to pull away from them. That wasn't what church was intended to be. My hope is in time we can shed those kind of things in our lives and learn to be what we're supposed to be. And it's supposed to be non-judgmental, loving, caring, recognize that we all struggle with sin, that we all have issues, and yet we can still get along and love each other and be free to talk about them with each other and not be judged or condemned for them. The old atmosphere was all about judgment and condemnation. You had to put on a happy, smiley face every time you walked through that door. You had to pretend like nothing is wrong in your life and that God's blessing you because you're righteous and He loves you and He points to you. And one day I pull in the one local supermarket and I look at the car next to me, and he had this little Jesus statue on the dashboard, and it's Jesus going like this. He's pointing to him, and he's like this. And I was like, I took a picture of it. Like, I remember, that's how we want people to look at ourselves as, right? You know, that's how we want people to see us. But we're not like, we're all broken people. We all have problems. We all have things going wrong in our lives. We all stumble into bad things every once in a while. And what the old atmosphere, and I hope people don't feel I'm being too critical, but I'm just identifying a truth, is that they taught us how to be that way. They taught us how to reject each other and judge each other. They taught us how to condemn people for their faults because we didn't fit in. And that's not what God's church is about. Not at all. Not in any way. It's nurturing. It's supposed to be loving. But what happens is in a spiritual attack, we tend to pull away from people. We tend to stop going. We tend to not want to go. We tend to, when we have disagreements, we say, oh, that person's lost. They don't know what they're talking about. Disagreements are wonderful in God because they shape us, they help us, they sharpen, iron sharpens iron. If you truly take a disagreement and you want it to work the right way, take what the other person disagrees with you about and research it, look into it, and try to understand it from their perspective. That's iron sharpening iron. When you go and run the other direction, we've had people do that. You're caving into an attack. You're caving into going away or shying away from those relationships that can build you up. Safest place for your own warped thoughts is your own living room in your home. Again, something I didn't want to see with this. You know, we have to ask ourselves, did we ever pull away from these things? Do we ever pull away from other relationships? It takes work. All relationships take work. All of them do. There's not a one that doesn't. There's not one that flows naturally through. Not even with your children, not even with your dog, not even with your hamster, not even with your goldfish. Everything takes work. You have to clean the tank, you know. Even he's got, you know, Ken's got a ton of animals. He'll tell you it takes a lot of work. Relationships take work.
Well, you ain't getting on that.
Yeah, see, there you go.
Low battery.
Oh, anyway, by now you're probably wondering what this thing is for. Okay, I want you to take it and pass it around. Ken, we got a rifle scope with us here.
Oh, I can see it.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Kind of obvious.
Yeah,
What's the power range?
it's 6 to 24 by 50. Now, if I remember right, you were a sniper, right, Ken? Yeah. Okay, think about this. If you think you're alone is better for you, spiritually minded and not and being away from spiritually minded people, and you think you're spiritually minded without them, the analogy is the same as walking around alone in a battlefield with this pointed at you. Same pointing.
Please charge the low battery.
Okay. And Satan's got a target on the back of your head. So take this up, look around. This is what it would be like. Okay, you can look at, I mean, most of us have looked through scopes before, but I want you to get the feeling that that's what he sees when you're alone. No, what Satan does. I mean, one thing Ken can tell you all about what it's like to be a sniper. One thing you do as a sniper is you wait till the soldier is alone. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. But imagine that pointed at the back of your head by your adversary, and you walking around by yourself in a battlefield. That's how Satan sees you when you go off on your own. Okay.
No.
Hey, Ken, can you repeat? Or do you want me to text him? So,
What's that?
okay, we just want to know you're still there. I mean, if you ever want to see an interesting movie, I mean, there's some things they could have left out of it. It's called Enemy at the Gates, and it's about Russian snipers, and it really drives the point home. It's one of the effective ways they fought battles is by using snipers. But it's usually snipers will wait for a soldier to be alone or isolated to shoot at him. Why? Because then they don't have a bunch of other soldiers shooting back at them. And you're a lot easier to pick off when you're by yourself. Same thing applies in the spiritual world. You're a lot easier to pick off when you're by yourself. Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. That's, so keep that in mind. That's how Satan looks at you. That's how his demons look at you. That's what he wants is to take you out at any given time. What did he say? What did he say to Christ about Peter? He wanted Christ to open up the door so he could sift them like wheat. I mean, imagine if Satan said that to Christ about you. Let me sift him. Let me put him to the test. I want to see how he can stand. When you're by yourself, you open yourself up to that. And you have to understand by being together is a lot stronger than being apart. Even if we disagree, even if we have different outlooks, different views, different ways we worship, whatever. That's what makes it easy to be in a place like this. That's what makes it easy to be in the Grace Church. Because you have to open up that idea that they're just like us. They're just a little different than us. But that's no reason to hate them or resist them or say they're lost or anything. I mean, honestly, in my time in the last several years, I've come to find a lot of these folks are far more spiritually sound than I am at times. And they seem to be more steadfast than I am at times. And I've met quite a few that are really into this for the right reasons. And it's very refreshing and very encouraging. And I find it very much uplifting to be with these folks. And that was a struggle for me because here the organization I'm part of is telling me I can't be around these people. And yet these people have it together. They know what they're talking about. And it's fun to be around them because they know what they're talking about. And you can talk about openly with things that you're struggling with them. And that's a real kicker because you can talk about things you're struggling with. I like our pastor group for that reason because you got a lot of open conversations about deep things. People aren't afraid to share those things. Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah. You know why, the former atmosphere wasn't the way it's supposed to be, and I know this? Turn to Galatians 6:6. Yeah. No.
You read it earlier. I'm pretty sure you read it.
Yeah, it was 6:7. I read.
6:7.
Yeah, 6:7. Does it say brothers and sisters? If someone is caught in sin, you shun them and kick them out the door and never see them again, right? No, what it says is it. If you're caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. Watch yourselves that you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of who? Christ. It's a fulfillment of the law. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. What a powerful thing to say. So he's telling you you're commanded to do this. This is part of the law, to carry each other's burdens. That's why you're supposed to be together. Well,
I
that's
would
it.
think there's just one answer.
Well, let's say you should part of carrying each other's burdens, being open with each other about your burdens. No one has it all together. Nobody does. I definitely don't have it all together. Just ask her; she knows.
Because some people might not feel so comfortable.
Yeah.
So making them feel welcome and helpful.
By sharing your own burdens
That's what
and
we.
expressing your own struggles, it allows people that are more hesitant to hear that you're doing that, to know that we're not going to be judgmental if they have sins that they're struggling with. They're going to be more open.
Yeah.
So you got to start with yourself by sharing your own struggles, which makes you feel comfortable to share them. But bearing one another's burdens includes praying for each other. And, you know, if I don't know that somebody is struggling immensely with something, I can't pray exactly for them. Now I can still pray for them,
Yeah.
but and God knows why they need help or what they need help with.
Yes.
But it makes it
One of the highlights of my life is when people come to me in secret and they say, "Please pray for me on this. I'm dealing with this." And it's a really deep, and they don't want to tell you this, but they need to tell you this because they need help. And when they truly need help and they come to you, it's a really uplifting feeling, that they, one, confided in you, and two, that they're willing to share that with you because they trust you. And it's a really great place to be. And as a church, we need to be more mindful of those things and practice those things because it's part of His law. It's part of what He wants of us, to be able to bear each other's burdens, no matter what they are. I mean, I'm not perfect. I got lots of things wrong with me. So, you know.
You know, there's another reason. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no.
It stops me off. Through the other church, one of the things that I was that we're supposed to go first, and then we take somebody who is a mutual friend of both, and go talk, and then you go to the pastor. That's not how it works. These people immediately go to the pastor.
Yep.
Get all the other things, so now you're already condemned, you're thrown in the wheelbarrow, and you're not given a chance to do anything.
Nope.
Already evil to all of them.
And that's the wrong way to be, and that's what we got to work against. And
and having been freed from sin, you become slaves of righteousness.
yep.
I am speaking in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you presented your members as slaves to impurity and lawlessness, resulting in further lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness,
Yep.
resulting in sanctification. So that's Romans chapter 6, verse 18. So one of the benefits of coming here, right, is we can actually use our time to do righteous things, right?
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Yeah. Share your lives. That's what it's about. Yeah, that's it. And I say, you see, it's part of the law to carry each other's burdens, to be with each other. He wants us to be together. And so it's not a good thing. One of the people, the pastors I met years ago, is that he was struggling with something, and he said what he had done, the one way he found that was good to deal with the problem, is he enrolled trustworthy people that had permission to check in on him, and even in uncomfortable ways, like showing up at his house, calling him out of the blue, even making sure that he was staying away from the issues he was dealing with on a regular basis. He said it was uncomfortable, but it kept him where he needed to be. And he said it was worth it to just try to remain pure and to know that people cared that much about him to do those things. I mean, I had a friend years ago who was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and you know what their policy is, at least then it was, friendship, relationship, keeping each other out of harm's way. And he said for him it worked. He had friends dropping by, telling him to steer clear of things, he had friends that he supported in that, and he found it very uplifting. He had some really strong friendships that developed out of AA. And in the purity of what it was intended to do, it did it in a great, loving way. And so you have to look at that with Christianity too. That functions, and its intention is supposed to function the same way. That you're supposed to support each other. You're supposed to be go-tos when you have trouble. And unfortunately, past programming has ruined us, and we need to overcome that. And we need to work hard at that and work overtime to it. It'll take some time. And I know for myself, it'll take some time.
So, the thing is, though, that God is there every minute with us,
Yeah.
right? He should be so real to us that we know we don't need another friend to call and come over and check on us, right? Because God is checking on us. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you see what I mean? That we have that close of a relationship with God, or we should. He sees what he's with us. He
Yeah.
sees what we're doing, and it should cause us.
But still, again, it ends up in a submission issue because he's not right there and not physically in front of you. He's living through the Holy Spirit. You can rationalize it. Okay. So you,
Like, it makes it harder to really want to feel accountable to God. So is it harder because when not
I
physically
mean, years ago, the pastor was one you could come to. The other people in the church were, by design, were people that you could come to and talk about your problems in a loving way, and that you wouldn't feel condemnation for it, and you wouldn't be thrown out for it. If you're habitual, then you were, but if you're truly trying to overcome it, then you could. I mean, it's in a way, it's all training for the future. It really is to be able to love each other that way. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 12 briefly says, two people can resist attack that would defeat one person alone. A rope made of three cords is hard to break. So togetherness is something that's found throughout the Bible. Even Adam needed somebody, so he created Eve. He had to allow them to have children. He just didn't start popping out human beings without that relationship. There was a loving thing going on there. I mean, even Eve had a rib from Adam as part of the symbolic union, is her creation.
I just want to add too to the idea of jurisdiction. So, we all are servants to God, all right? So it's not like our jurisdiction as individuals to basically condemn any other person. And I liken it more like this idea that we talk about in Galatians 6 about bearing burdens. It's kind of a little bit like what Jesus did as an example with the sheep, right?
Yeah.
One lost sheep is hauled in the fold. 99 are out there, one's off on the side. And that's like a congregation, right? You can have a whole bunch of people in the congregation doing the right things, and there's one maybe that goes off to the side. You're supposed to go get that one and marshal them back in to
Yeah.
the rest of them. You're not supposed to cut our losses.
Yeah.
Time to cut the herd.
Yeah.
Cut our losses. Look at another sheep from somebody else.
That's it. I mean,
The sheep from
one of the other powerful examples he has is a woman caught in adultery. They threw her down in front of them, and it says, he without sin cast the first stone. They all walked out, and they said, "Do it." Yeah, he goes, "I don't condemn you, sin no more."
That's the point. It's the jurisdictions, not to condemn you, but you, as a body, generally have no right, what's right to do, right? We all read our Bibles, we know what should be right, but bringing somebody back is like error. That's the right
Yeah.
approach.
I was told that with the happenings in our former association. Guy Swenson and I were talking about that, and he's like, "Why didn't someone take their arm and put it around?" They were talking about the Henderson. Why didn't someone take their arm and put it around them and just gently bring them back? That was his response. That's the right response. Why didn't someone do that? Why did they just throw them right out? You have to understand that what we came out of isn't a church. It isn't the church that was intended. It's not a church in the sense that it doesn't function like a church. So 5 do nots to break an enemy's attack is they'll help you to withstand or overcome these things. Do not forget who made you. Do not forget that God had made you, and He made you with trials in mind. A heart attack, when one happens, the affected areas of your body that are directly affected, they start to die. They actually will get gray. They'll actually die up. I mean, if you ever seen tissue die, and that I'm gonna be honest with you, and I don't mean to be too graphic, but when my mother died, I was there. You could actually see her color change. Within a few minutes, her color was very pasty. You could actually see the life drain out of her. And things die when your blood's cut off, or when you cut off the spirit and you cut off the spiritual influence, it dies. But when God uses a spiritual attack, something does die. And when it's worked through his hands and his controlling, the part he wants to die dies. And when it's worked to his purpose, the part that he wants out of your life is dead. Keep that in mind. He fearfully made you. He made you with a lot of thought in mind. You didn't just pop out of a bush somewhere. You just didn't show up on the scene and he didn't know who you were. He created you. He made you who you are. And you are his in that way. And everything in your life is his. So he's shaping you through these attacks. And you have to remember, when he's in control and you submit to him, they may hurt. They may be hard to go through. But again, the things that die through them are the things he wants gone. Sometimes he wrenches you out of things that you love because you're putting too much into them. I've had careers like that where there's a wake-up call. You're putting too much into this. You're focusing too much on this. It's taking away from the right things. Yeah.
I think that was reminding me, I didn't want to comment, but back when we were doing point one, loss of spiritual desire, that has been a thing in my life before where, like, I really love real estate and everyone knows that because I'm very open about that. But sometimes it's too much in all of our lives. We get too much into things that we love and it's distracting, like you were saying. And so sometimes you pull away from the godly relationships, the good things that you should be doing. And recently in my life, actually, I was talking to a coworker, and I don't know whether this person is being called into the faith or not, or if God's just using them. But He did definitely use them in a way to like inspire me to see the Bible differently, to start talking about certain things, and drawing me back. And for a while though, I stopped like doing all my real estate stuff because I just want to focus back on the most important stuff in our lives. I'm in the transition to a new job and stuff, so it's like, all right, let me focus on more important stuff. So anyway, that's just been something really significant for me.
Yeah. Romans 8:28. How many people know that one by heart? Yeah. And we know that all things and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. For those who God foreknow, who he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those who he predestined, he also called, and those he called, he also justified, and those he justified, he also glorified. There's a whole package right there. That all these things work for our good. Again, the spiritual attack is being worked the right way, and we will go through them. The parts that die are the ones he doesn't want in our lives. He's shaping us always and always. And then another way, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. So everything is what everybody deals with and all these things. And to condemn another person for something that you could easily go through is totally wrong. Totally wrong at all. And everybody has their weaknesses. Everybody does. People get demonized, alcoholism or smoking. And there's not a whole lot. It's interesting because even in the Bible, there's not a whole lot said about smoking, is there? But they demonize that more than they do alcoholism. 1 Corinthians 10:13. I mean, there's evidence even in history that smoking has been around for thousands of years, but you never see a single thing mentioned in the Bible about it. And yet there's people in the past association that were demonized for doing it because they struggle with it. It's an addiction. You can be addicted to food. You can be addicted to like cheesecake. You know, you can be addicted. Yeah, that's it. You can be. I mean, my dad loved RC Cola to the point where it made him a diabetic. I mean, it's just he loved RC Cola. So another one is do not forsake a time and place for prayer. Prayer can take place anytime you wish, but you have to make time. You have to make a place for it. I find praying along the tracks is my favorite spot. It always has been a favorite for me. I really enjoy being out there, and I hate it when I miss it. It seems I tried it other places, it just doesn't seem to work. It seems to be really powerful when you can separate yourself from everything, walk out there, be away from all things, and you're in a private place. And it's a good place. And if you can do that, not everybody can do that. Find a place to do it. Find a place. It's interesting because I used to do that in our old address, and I come to find that someone I met along the way, but actually I found out through time talking to them that they were actually there when I was praying. They heard them, and that's very uncomfortable. He goes, yeah, I heard you. Like, oh boy, where do I go with this one? Yeah, you never know who's around you. That's the only downside to that. I mean, one time, yeah, yeah, that's always a unique experience. I mean, it's kind of funny because one time I was practicing a message, and there's this one hill back there where I just stop and do this. And I get through the whole thing, and I'm satisfied where I am at that day. So I turn around, and I go down the hill, and there's a woman standing in her underwear right there. And it's like I could easily, she didn't see me, and I was like, I could easily go back up the other way, and she wouldn't see me. I gotta find out what she's doing here. But it was a weird situation, and she was on her way out of Erie trying to get to Corey, and she was a total mess. And I don't know if she's on something or what, but so I talked to her and goes, well, this isn't the way to Corey. If you really, and she's getting into it because I pop out of the woods, and here I am, there she is, and she's there in the woods. And she's like, yeah, I really, and it goes, well, you can't do that. You have to go back in the top. You're really allowed to take the tracks to Corey, take the ones that go south out of there, and they'll take you to Corey. You'll get there. And she wanted to meet up with some guy she met down there. And so I was like, well, this is a bad situation. I better get out of here. And so I come back, back the same way, and I see she's gone. I'm like, oh, good. And so I walk back, and I couldn't help but stop thinking about her. Me and the boys went out for haircuts in the Northeast. We come back, and we see they're testing engines on the test track really fast. So that was cool. We'll get some videos of this. And then we see the news crew there. I'm like, what happened? Why is the news crew here? Well, she decided that train would take her back to Erie. So she waited till it got to the end of the line and stopped. She hopped on the nose of the one engine, and she ended up stuck on this train going back and forth on the test track. And the only reason they knew she was there is because they were flagging the crossing, because they were doing 75-mile-an-hour tests, and they needed to flag the crossing, have guys physically there, and one of them spotted her there. And so they called the police, and they took her off, and then they didn't arrest her, they treated her like a mental health issue. And it's just, what a bizarre story. But it's just, anyway, off topic. That's, be aware when you choose a place to pray. Make sure. Anyway, do not forsake assembling is another one. We're supposed to edify and build each other up, and it's also in the Bible, Hebrews 10 verse 25. This group exists to edify each other, and we need, again, I'm going to emphasize this again, we need to shed the old ways we do things. And it's the key to the future of being what God wants us to be. We see it as part of His law that we're supposed to do these things. We're supposed to do these.